working in a motivated environment. Probably that sounds tempting for many, but many also will think, yeah, that sounds very tempting and also very theoretical. In reality, many people go to work and they are not motivated for what they do. They go there for a specific reason, and often the reason is either payment or a mortgage that has to be paid or other bills that have to be covered. However, some people are highly motivated at work. And the question is, how is it possible that some people are so highly motivated while other people are completely demotivated, not motivated at all? It is very obvious that motivation is something that you want to have, or that is something you want to see with your staff. If you, however, disencourage people or demotivate people, it is often the fault of the leader. It's often the leader's fault, not the person working for you. And that is one of the main issues now. Motivation very often in leadership is associated with one of these pep talks or giving people a smart one-liner that as a leader, you probably say something like, oh, there are always bad moments at work, but every change has the possibility and the opportunity to change for the better. You should see the opportunity, not the threat. This is not only painful to listen to, it often comes from people who are very privileged, who live in a very safe and sound situation, and who have no risk due to the change that might occur right now. So motivation has nothing to do with these motivational, inspirational one-liners, because these motivational, inspirational one-liners never solve anything. Never in history, a crisis occurred and someone said, let's get a motivational speaker here, give a one-liner, and magically the problem disappears. Never, ever in history that ever has happened. The next problem is that often promises and often empty promises are connected with motivation. So people say, I was hired at company XYZ, and I received emails about this. So this is all proven. I was hired here. They promised me if I do XYZ, I get XYZ in return, certain promotion, higher pay, more responsibility, more accountability. They pay for a college degree. They give me additional training, whatever else it was. And often only a fraction of that came to reality, if at all. And the result of that is that you very quickly have a long-lasting, if not everlasting, demotivation of staff. And in addition to that, you have a loss of trust. People will stop to trust you when you behave that way. And now we have to look into how to do it better. How are you able to motivate your staff? And the first step we have to take is that you stop to show one behavior. And they give you an example. One employee asked his leader to work from home. And then the leader says, well, yeah, we have this work from home policy, but there are exceptions. Maybe it's possible a couple of days per month, but I can't tell you which ones. And I am determining which ones are the ones that are acceptable. And you have to talk to me before. You cannot just not show up and decide why you want or not want to show up. It is challenging. Let's just say that. And this kind of limitation is the reason is missing. There's a limitation for no reason. It's a personal opinion of a leader, and the leader says, my personal opinion, and often these opinions are, I think people aren't working from home, or I simply do not trust them, which, by the way, is a horrible statement from leaders towards their staff. As soon as you put a limitation in for no reason, and that is the first step you have to stop doing, putting in a limitation for no reason always ends with massive frustration, people going home and comparing other offers on the job market. As soon as you limit people in what they can do for no reason, people will sooner or later leave your organization. If you are of the opinion that remote work does not work, and you give a specific reason, I give you an example. Someone says, well, we are very flexible with work, and of course you can work from home, and we don't give you any limitation when you work. However, you must be available on the phone from 10 a.m. until 3 p.m. And then, of course, and rightfully so, the person working for that organization said, why? I am more of a night person. Can't I just work from 5 p.m. till 1 a.m.? Why do I have to be available from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m.? And then the leader said, because we looked into our system and 90% of all customer calls come in between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. And people will understand that because people know what the business model is, and people know that customers are the ones who pay the bill, who pay the salary. So as soon as you have a reason, you can always show that reason. Full disclosure, full transparency on anything you do. It means no limitation of people's freedom for no reason. And if we now talk about how to have a motivating environment, how to create motivating circumstances, we have to talk about new work. And I don't mean new work which was created by some marketing department with a bunch of buzzwords of, oh, we have the human being in our center of attraction, and we always do anything for our staff, and reality looks completely different. I do not mean that kind of new work. New work is a scientific concept. There's a paper which was written by Benjamin Fritjof, and Benjamin Fritjof very clearly showed how a motivating environment, how motivating circumstances work, and there are 5 factors in total. Factor number 1 is autonomy, independence. It means that you have to show a certain flexibility, for example, work from home, work from anywhere, flexibility in working hours. And of course, there are certain jobs, and I fully agree with you. Some people say, if I need a nurse in a hospital, they are on shifts. Shift work is a specific time. You have to show up at exactly that time. You have to be on time when you show up, and you can, at least in some cases, you can leave on time depending on the situation, because we all know sometimes they cannot, but you have to be very much on time. They tell you when to work, and you cannot do it from home. You cannot do it from anywhere. And yes, people understand that. However, people then often decide to do something else. Where do you think the talent gap we have in that sector comes from? So autonomy and independence, you have to see, and that, by the way, is something that Microsoft did very well during the pandemic. Their first work from home policy was offer as much flexibility as possible. Exactly the right thing to do. So step number 1, autonomy and independence. Step number 2 is freedom. And when you now say, hey, people here are really free in what they do as long as they get the job done, we don't care how they do it, as long as it's legal, compliant, and legitimate, and everything's fine when it comes to regulatory compliance. They can do whatever they want, and that's cool. However, one aspect is also part of freedom, and that is called payment. If you, for example, are one of these companies who say, well, we don't pay that well, and we know that, let's just assume the following situation. You sit down during an interview, and you tell someone you're interviewing, well, we know we don't pay very well. It is what it is. And someone then answers, well, what a great fit, because I don't work very well. It is what it is. The only answer you can give then is, perfect, here's your contract. And you probably do not want to do that. If you are fully aware of the fact that you are not paying very well, you will get the rest of the talent market that didn't find a job anywhere else for a reason, for one reason or the other. So when it comes to freedom, it means that freedom outside of work is also part of what you have to offer. If people work and they are happy where they work and they are safe, and probably you offer, I don't know, staff, food, or whatever else you offer. But people go home and say, I can't do anything outside work because payment is so poor, and I live in an expensive area. And then the company says, oh, we can't change what rent is charged. That is not our business. It is your business. You have to pay according to where people live and how people live. You, of course, do not have to pay someone a Ferrari when they just are obsessed with having a Ferrari, but you have to be able to offer people a decent pay, a decent wage, a decent way of living. That is part of freedom as well. And that's where many companies already fail. You get people in on temporary contracts via external companies where sometimes people have 0-hour contracts and they don't even know how to put food on the table next week. And then you say, oh, you're not really engaged with the organization, aren't you? We can't see that you identify yourself with the organization. No, because putting food on the table has a higher priority. Surprise, surprise. Freedom means freedom at work and freedom outside of work. So when you, for example, look into, let's say, Switzerland, where every single person, no matter, as long as you go to work and they work hard and they work longer hours, have less paid vacation, like 20 days to 24 days, work 45 hours a week. I know all of that. However, anyone working a full-time job has the ability to lead a great life. And that is something where many companies and many countries fell behind significantly, either due to very high taxes or to a very low income structure. It is very important that you look into, do we really offer freedom outside of work? And when you say, that's none of my business, believe me, it is, because people have one freedom, the freedom to choose their employer. So when you say none of my business, they can say none of my business how you find someone who works in that team for that company. So payment is part of freedom. Aspect number 3, participation. And I mean real participation. There's nothing more frustrating compared to the situation where people say, oh, they asked us what to do and we said we should do X, Y, Z, and then they did something completely different. If you, for example, say, and this might occur, let's say you ask your staff, what should we do, A or B? And they say A with a vast majority. And you come back and you say, for example, well, unfortunately, we had to decide for B because we took a survey with our clients and 92% of all our clients prefer B. We don't know why, but they prefer B. Then people will understand that because they know that customers, clients, mandates, however you call them in your industry, are the ones who pay the bill and the salary. However, if you have no disclosure, if you have no transparency, if it's just arbitrary, just taking an arbitrary decision after you ask people just get the impression that you asked them to hope for a coincidental agreement on your already made decision. And that is where people lose trust and motivation. So aspect number 3, participation, and I mean real participation. When do you ask them and how do you act on their decision? Aspect number 4 is creativity. I was very surprised when I talked to someone in controlling and asked them, how do you deal with creativity? Because from my point of view, I'm not working in controlling, just to say that, controlling is not very creative. And then he showed me different cases where he said, well, we have a wide range of solutions available here. It's not creative like you put colors in there. It's not creative that you put job ads out there. You don't produce anything that can be seen in a graphic out in a poster, but it's very creative in the job you do. And I don't mean creative bookkeeping where the public prosecutor shows up at the end. That is not the point here. So creativity is an aspect where people say it is available in absolutely any job, which is important. But of course, creativity and freedom goes hand in hand. So when you tell people exactly what they need to do and there's no freedom at work, then they will not be creative. At least most likely they will not be. So creativity, and step number 5 is self-fulfillment. Can you answer the question of purpose? When you, for example, ever looked into what do people make per month as a net income when they work in social services? And I highly recommend you to do so because you will not believe what you see there. In many countries, in many jobs, you think, how do people even get along on that income? And these people are often very happy, very motivated, and like what they do. And the question is why? Why is payment in these industries so poor? That's, of course, also a political topic. We can't answer that question here on the podcast. However, the main aspect here is it answers their question of doing something that makes sense, doing something that is sustainable, doing something that helps human beings every single day. And for many people, this is important. And maybe more important than making more money by selling a very meta level investment scheme, which is unclear to work out, but maybe very profitable when selling it. So is your organization able, are your leaders able to answer the question of purpose? Because if not, especially with younger generations, you will struggle to find talent because people will say, well, I worked here, but somehow it just doesn't make sense. I don't feel that I belong here. I just don't see why I am here. So I moved on. And by the way, if you then think that people will, and I often see it on social media, where leaders say, oh, someone was just so arrogant, they were talking about this purpose nonsense, these people will never find a job. Well, normally they have a job within 48 hours after that. So be sure that you look into, are we answering the question of purpose? Last but not least, how to put everything into practice. And that's a 5-step process as well. So step number 1 is a WSA, work situation analysis. It means that normally with an external person, you can do it internally if you have someone who is fully qualified to do so. Otherwise, you take an external person. I've done it hundreds of times where you look into how is work doing right now? What is going well? What is probably going not so well? Then you look into pros and cons. So what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? That's step number 2, where you say, okay, we're doing well here. Perfect. So we just keep this up. And here we are not doing well. We need to work on that. And then people make suggestions. That is step number 3. However, suggestions always have to undergo a so-called feasibility study. You have to see if it's feasible, and in many cases, especially when it's a for-profit company, is it economically viable? Because otherwise, many questions will always be answered with, oh, hire more staff, hire more staff, hire more staff. And in many organizations, many companies, many enterprises, the larger they are, the more complicated it gets. And in the public sector, it's even worse. Just hiring someone does not happen. It takes forever to get people aligned that they allow you to hire one more person for your team. In very small businesses, it might be quicker, but with what you do in many larger organizations will have a whole process behind it that just hire people is not the answer. And sometimes people might make a suggestion which is not compliant because they don't know any better. It's not their fault, but people have to know. People simply have to know. So step number 3, you get the suggestions and then you look into, is it feasible? Is it economically viable? Is it possible at all? Or are we violating some rule, or is it something which we cannot do anyway because it is simply not possible due to regulatory compliance, maybe it's economically not viable, or simply people say this, just hire more people, is not fixing the problem, because when more people work on it, you will in 4 weeks' time say, oh, we need even more people again and again and again. Step number 4, you now have to look into who are the stakeholders and what is your communication plan towards them. Because no matter how great you are, no matter what your ideas are, if your stakeholders say thank you, but no thank you, for example, if you have investors and they suddenly pull their money out, or one of your stakeholders might be someone with a political background who says, I'm not supporting you politically and I'm having a go against your situation and your idea, you will not win. You have to look into who are the stakeholders internally and externally, and then you have to look into what is the communication plan, how do we approach them, how do we convince them that what we decided to change is a good idea. Because step number 5 then is a project where everything is put in place. And when everything is put in place, the implementation project, then you have a more motivating environment. And of course, now some people might think, well, that sounds a bit of work. Yeah, and it is, I can tell you. It is very important that if you have any open aspects, ideas, anything you'd like to talk about, just drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com, and then we take it from there. If you like to chat about something very specific, training, speaking, coaching, consulting, mentoring, you have project or interim management needs, or you have events and you need someone who speaks there or hosts it, feel free to do so. But we also can just talk about your question. It doesn't cost you a penny. nb@nb-networks.com. Thank you very much for everyone who did so, who contacted me during the last weeks. Very respectful discussions. Thank you very much for that. Also, thank you very much for another amazing week. Some people might have seen it already on social media. I've put it on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on Instagram. We again had a record week. We had a quintuple top 150 ranking, meaning the English podcast went top 150 in Switzerland and Ireland, and the German podcast went top 150 in Germany and Austria. In Austria, even not only management, but also in business. And in management in Austria, it went ranked 14. So a top 15 ranking. That is the top 20 ranking. That is just amazing. Thank you very much for taking the time to continuously listening to this podcast. And by the way, if you want to do me a favor, just go, if it's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, just give it a 5-star ranking. That will be really helpful. Thank you very much for that. Another thing I always recommend is that you should sign up for the leadership letter, because I still get emails where people say, I found an article, but there's a paywall. Yes, newspapers, magazine, and publications charge for what they publish. That is normal. It's called a business model. So if you want to have free access, there's only one way how to get free access to everything or anything I publish. And when you go to expert.nb-networks.com and put your email address in there, you receive an email every Wednesday morning. It's 100% content, ad-free guarantee. So feel free to do so. And then you will always be up to date and get free access to anything that was published. But the step number 3 is the most important one. And that means apply what you heard in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the positive change in your organization, enterprise, community, wherever you want to put it. You will only see it if you apply what you heard here. I wish you all the best implementing these steps in your organization. Always happy to help you. Just drop me an email and we take it from there. And at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.